Hi again, everybody, and welcome to a new edition of Newsmakers. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, May 30th, and I am joined by our all-star panel of top local journalists, Ryan P. Cruz of the Santa Barbara Independent, Nick Welsh, the Angry Poodle and executive editor of the Independent, and Josh Molina, man of many hats and host of the popular Santa Barbara Talks podcast. We're expecting Kelly Fozzie to descend from the atmosphere any minute now. Nick's got an important a date with an electric bike here, so we're going to start with him and talk about the most complicated story in the history of man, the latest in the Sable oil uh, saga. And Nick, just to level set, when we talk about offshore oil drilling, there's three elements to it, right? There's the platform out there in the ocean where they suck it up in the straw. Then there's the offshore oil pipeline, then the onshore pipeline, and that's what we've been fighting about for the last several years. But now comes Sable Oil to declare victory in the whole thing and say, yeah, we take the anniversary of the Refugio oil spill to say we've started pumping oil again. But then Judge Anderley interjects to say, not so fast. Straighten us out here. Where are we exactly at all?
Okay. Yeah, you're right. So 10 years ago, we had the big oil spill off the Refugio coast. Now we have Sable Oil is trying to get that restarted. The pipeline was corroded. Sable's trying to get it restarted. And last Monday, on the anniversary of the spill, they said, "Oh, by the way, we're pumping already. We're pumping oil," and that shocked everybody because nobody knew about it. Monique Lamone's office didn't know about it, or state senator, or state assembly member didn't know it, the county supervisor didn't know it, and the state lands commission didn't know about it. Now, the state lands commission is important because Sable has to take its offshore oil across state waters to get it onshore, and you don't want them mad at you. And they have a month-to-month lease with state lands. So Elena Kounalakis, who is the lieutenant governor and the chair of this commission,
And
wrote
wanna be next governor.
wannabe next governor wrote a drop dead in the horseshoe road-in letter to Sable saying, "Your announcement on Monday shows you to be pretty much a bad faith operator. We don't trust your motives. We don't trust your ability to be a transparent operator. And the way you're operating and the way you're not communicating is enough to put in peril your lease, which, by the way, is a month-to-month lease. So deal with that." Now, that all sounds very dramatic, and somebody at a higher political echelons is starting for the first time to take this fight seriously. Sable, in previous such statements by other agencies, Sable has sort of shrugged their shoulders and said, "This is political window dressing that people in high positions have to do. It looks like they're responding to the environmental concerns, but the reality is we're fine, we're solid, and nothing's going to touch us." So we will see how much Kounalakis is really willing to bring the hammer down.
And then what about the judge?
The judge is another case. It's Judge Tom Anderley, smart, been going on forever and highly respected. And he issued a temporary restraining order against Sable.
And by the way, Nick, he issued some brilliant rulings in Ampersand versus Roberts, which you
There you go.
but go ahead.
There you go. And he basically said, Sable, you have to stop. It's a temporary restraining order on all this pipeline repair work he's been doing. Now that again sounds like a really big deal. But what Sable says, nah, we're already finished with our pipeline repair work. We've done everything. So, you lock the barn door after the horses are out. And so it's unclear really what that really means.
So where are we exactly? So on the one hand, it sounds like Sable might be doing this just for their financiers or the people who are bagging there say, yeah, don't worry, everything's cool, we're fine, as well as to thumb their nose at the environmentalists. But are they about to start pumping oil in that pipeline or not?
They have a ways to go. So, um, they are not able to put oil in the pipeline yet. They need to get a green light by the Office of the State Fire Marshal. In the last exchange of emails I had with the fire marshal's office, they said they do not have an application in yet. That may have changed since then for a restart, and they certainly haven't issued a restart permit. And go back a couple of months now when the state fire marshal was at the Pueblos High School along with the heads of 8 other state agencies talking about Sable. The fire marshal said, we're not going to do anything until all outstanding permit compliance issues have been resolved. Now, that does not have the weight of law. It does not have the weight of regulatory mandate, but they said it. What happens now with that and how they interpret this, we will have to see. The judge's ruling certainly buttresses the case of the California Coastal Commission, which fined Sable $18 million, the largest ever, for doing work without a permit and thumbing their nose at the Coastal Commission when they issued a cease and desist order.
And remaining AWOL in this whole fight is Prince Gavin Newsom, our fine governor, who's spending most of his time on right-wing broadcasts with his pals Charlie Kirk and others. But he's sort of mysteriously missing here, isn't he?
I think that if you are running for president and you already have an Achilles heel because you are from California where everything is messed up, the idea of saying no to an oil refinery, or an oil operation, just so later, when oil prices can go up or gas prices go up, people can accuse you of being part of the problem. I think he's just playing a duck and cover on that.
Yeah. So good to know Gavin's political career comes ahead of the rest of us once again. All right. Thanks, bud.
Okay.
Thank you for that update. Josh, speaking of awful stories and won't go away, you had this piece on the 8-story blockbuster monstrosity behind the mission that's being planned by some out-of-town developers, which I don't know, for some reason I thought was all done. I don't know, but it's come back to life. It's like Frankenstein's monster or something.
Well, these are out-of-town developers who are taking advantage of the fact that the city did not have a certified housing element when they submitted their pre-application. And so during this period, cities, counties that did not have a housing element certified were able to submit and get their plans locked into place under what's called builder's remedy, which limits the type of review that local government can do. And so they submitted that. That was, I think, a little more than a year ago. And so they decided that they were going to, the city, we can't stop them, but we can slow them down. And so they have been going back and forth with their application, deeming it incomplete. And so now here we are, their fourth attempt to get the application deemed complete. And the city is running out of things to say that it's not incomplete. So there's a few technical issues. They want to know some square footage. They want to have some questions about the mechanical parking lift. And so eventually where we're going to get is the developer is going to submit an application to build a 90 feet tall apartment building behind the Santa Barbara Mission on a property that you kind of just drive past right now. There's a gate. There's a stone wall. There's a whole bunch of trees, and there's a whole lot of outrage on this topic because
So it's right next to like where the cemetery where the
yeah.
troops are buried and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's concerns about evacuation routes, fire, traffic, circulation. There needs to be a CEQA environmental review And there's a whole number of issues there. So the city knows that this project is going to get delayed for a long time. And so it's going to be a matter of whether the developer is going to hang in there or a developer is going to sell it or somebody's going to try to maybe buy this property to
So does the
preserve it.
neighborhood ever get to weigh in on this?
Well, they do at Architectural Board of Review hearings because the city's review is going to be limited to design and aesthetics. Now, they still have to undergo a CEQA, an environmental review. There's going to be a number of issues related to what they find in the ground there, related to traffic, to remediation. And so that's going to slow everything down. There's been some talk of somebody like coming together to like buy the land, make them an offer. These developers, they don't really care as much about the culture and charm of Santa Barbara. They're just trying to build. And I think most people, even the most passionate housing advocates, would say that it'd be better to build housing downtown or elsewhere, not in this spot. And even if you're not somebody who doesn't like housing or something like that, I mean, there's a whole host of issues to
And
sort of.
aren't we also sort of in the midst of sort of a traffic redo in that whole area?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of issues with this, and I think one of the background stories with this is that the developers have done the bare minimum with all of these designs they've put it in, all these applications, and to this point, each of them has to extend the deadline so they can change it within 20% or something like that, and they extend the deadline another 90 days, another 90 days. So they've done this, I think, 4 times now. In order to keep this project kind of alive, but they've yet to show how serious they are. They've yet to present themselves as a person of, yeah, this is who I am. This is what we want to build. Look at what we want to build. Like we've seen dozens, hundreds of people probably do in this city when they build projects. So the question is how serious they are. And, are they just kind of hedging their bets? And, as long as we keep pushing this application a little bit farther, we can keep it alive. Yeah, we're going to see what it looks like, and there's going to be a lot of backlash. And like Josh said, the CEQA evaluation is going to bring up a lot of problems. There's going to be artifacts right behind the mission that are going to be thousands of years old that need to be processed and handled the right way. And that's going to be a cost to the developer. At some point, the cost is going to be too high, and they're going to not be able to do this. But
So the key question then becomes what will happen first? Oil through the pipeline or breaking ground on the eight-story?
that's the big question.
I would say oil will be definitely going through the pipeline a lot sooner.
Oh, okay.
And
I
one thing
bet
I want
my
to
bet
add
on
too, one that's frustrating as a reporter is there was a new state law that was passed, I think a year ago, which says that the architectural renderings before it's a deemed complete project are the owner of the architect. So if you'll notice, in any of the stories that we've done, there are no renderings, like official renderings from the architect, because you have to make an appointment to go down to the city and actually look at them, but they will not allow you to take pictures.
Yeah,
And
Really?
so
You can't photograph it with your phone?
you can't even take a photograph
Yeah,
with your
without
phone.
the architect. And usually they'll provide it to us and it won't be a problem, but
The
Well,
architect,
is it a local architect?
No,
so
oh,
usually
yeah.
that's the architect will be like, sure, here you go, but they don't want people seeing this.
But the
It's-
architect won't even sign his name on
it's
it.
a big box that meets the check boxes of
Yeah.
what a development should be in Santa Barbara right now. These people have never built in Santa
I'll see you
Barbara.
guys. Gotta go.
Literally, Nick.
isn't it?
So
See you,
there's
Nick.
there's going to be a lot of questions, definitely a lot of public pushback. If I was the developer, I'd get ahead of it and try to make yourself public. And this is what we want to do. At least present it in some sort of positive spin. We haven't seen that to date.
And Fred Sweeney, Jerry, who you may have heard that name before.
My hero,
Fred's-
yes.
Yeah, we're very close, Fred and I. He has a lot of respect for my work and vice versa. But he has created drawings. Brian's probably seen them, but he's done his own drawings of what it would look like based off of his understanding. We haven't published them because we don't want to
Is he
give people
for it or
false-
against it?
He's against it for sure. He's
Yeah,
trying
'cause
to.
he lives in a neighborhood.
He's trying to get it out there and say this is what it would look like. We haven't published those because we don't want to create confusion, but people have seen sort of like whatever they call interpretations of what it might look like, kind of thing. But I'd be stunned. That would be the most stunning thing, I would think, short of Doss Williams
And then the final
losing, to see this thing actually get built one day.
the final little twist is, the agent on record, Ben Eilenberg, he's a lawyer that, he wasn't disbarred, but he's not allowed to practice right now. It's voluntarily suspended, I believe is what it is. And he also was representing, I wrote a story about 2 years ago about this couple, Craig Smith and Stephanie Smith, and they're building a builder's remedy
Oh,
project
these
over
are
on
the
Grand
people that
Avenue.
boil the fat off your body.
Yeah, so there's another wrinkle, and they're not on paper involved with this, but he's the same agent, and it's really we're trying to figure out, we would love to speak to the people who are behind this and see the drawings. The public really wants to see the drawings. You can go to the public, you guys can go to the city hall and request and see them, but you can't reproduce them or publish those. But
We need to get somebody with a photographic memory.
there we go.
Send Fred over there. So thank you, Senator Scott Wiener and Prince Gavin, for these fine state laws. Well, you fellas both are graduates of DP, and a couple of my daughters went to DP. And gee, I just can't remember anything that's been sadder than this memorial service that you both wrote about for the three kids.
Yeah, and
killed.
it just
It's just broke my heart.
Yeah, and it just feels like we've had a lot of young people in our community, die recently. We've had a stabbing over there by Turnpike, of course, Liz Hamill at UCSB. There's the kid that got lost in Big Bear and they found him dead. There's Danny Mesa, artist, recently passed away. But this one, three high school students all taken at the same time, and all, the aspect that they were just at a lifeguard training and having the time of their life as a high school boy with helicopters and jet skis and big trucks and all that. And you're kind of on your way home, and think me and Josh both reported this, that they're on their way back to eat In and Out, and they're talking to their friend and brother and joking around, and it's just such a tragedy. And going to cover that is definitely one of the most heaviest things that I've personally had to see. And just see the community come out and kind of grieve together and process. It was beautiful at the same time, but it was definitely just heart-wrenching.
Yeah, it's hard to. I mean, it was beautiful in the photographs and just both of the accounts that you both filed. But gosh, it's just Josh. You talked to Bill Woodard quite a bit, the principal. This must have been horrible for him.
Yeah, I got to say, Bill Woodard continues to prove himself as a total professional, just perfect for the times and perfect for the position of a principal. He's so classy. He's had to deal with many of these issues. There was a teacher at DP who died hiking last year. And then this tragedy is unlike anything else in that you have a freshman, you have a junior, you have a senior, Jake Curtis, Alexander Wood, Michael Oshner. And so these are three families that thread almost, the entire school in some way. And they also played sports, and they were well known. And so this is not like this is something that will change the school forever. And then particularly right before graduation and awards night and all of the stuff that comes at the end of the year. But Woodard was very classy. He spoke at the beginning of the event. They put it together very quickly. The Greek Theater is this incredible outdoor amphitheater, and it was full. And then there was standing room only. People were standing around it, and there was a program, and then there was an open mic, and people went and spoke. And so there were probably a dozen speakers by the time it was all over. And it's when you deal with a high school community, that's already a very tight-knit community just by its nature. And so when you have a tragedy like that, you really see how powerful it is when people come together to grieve. And there are so many tears, so sad. As a reporter, it's I love my job. I love everything I cover. As a reporter, covering something like this, You've got to be sensitive. You've got to talk to people. You've got to understand how everything is happening. But we got good interviews. We got good photos, Ryan and I, and did a best job to cover the event for people who are not there, but then also do it justice for people who were there. And there's a number of events coming up, memorials for the family, and it's a very sad thing. And the car that they hit, there was a Lompoc doctor. His wife was in the car. I think the Lompoc doctor is doing a little bit better out of ICU, appears to be on the road to recovery, the long road. His wife is still very ill, critical condition, as far as I know. And so that's another separate story that, we're going to tell in more detail down the road, when the timing is appropriate there. So it's just a very sad thing all around. And yes, we're both DP grads. My son went to DP. My daughter's going to go to DP. They have the We Are DP banner and logo. And it's so many people, not just Goleta kids go to DP. It's one of the premier schools. And so people from all over go, Montecito, Santa Barbara. And so it threads more than just Goleta. It's an entire region and community, this tragic incident.
Yeah, well, that's tough duty as a journalist, and you both did really, really good work on that. But as I say, it's in the end, it just breaks your heart. So, all right, Ryan, you had this piece about a good news, I guess, in Carp, huh? Linden Square. What is Linden Square? And
Yeah, so Linden Square is this new downtown, we don't really have anything off the top of my head. We have the public market in Santa Barbara, but this one it's outdoor, and it's a mixture of retail and restaurants. So you have some of the most popular kind of new restaurants. Corazon has a new spot there. It's seafood and veggie oriented, and then you have Batina's, which is in Montecito. That you have a new spot. There's called Tina's. They're going to serve pizzas there, and Third Window has a new place where they're having burgers and wings and brisket, and there's Channel Island Surfboard. There's all kinds of little shops there, and it seemed like it happened pretty quickly. I think.
yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, this hasn't been something. It's not like Sable or the
No,
Mission
yeah,
Tower. We've
I mean,
been
in
fighting.
fact, I remember covering the first, I think, planning commission meetings when they had the first kind of renderings, and these developers, I think they had a really intentional design on how they were going to have this work out. They were going to get people that were known in the area already, maybe didn't have a place in Carpinteria, but were known in Santa Barbara on the South Coast. Channel Island Surfboard has deep history in Carpinteria, but usually have had their flagship shop in the Funk Zone, Santa Barbara. And so to have all these together, I think for the Carpinteria community, it's really been accepted, or it seemed, I don't know if just Carpinterians are coming there, or people from out of town are coming
Oh,
in
it
to
sounded
visit,
great. That's
but
why I
it's
wanted
been
to ask
packed.
you about
Yeah.
it, and I think I might go there this weekend. But I just it's all commercial, right? How did they escape having to build 500 units of housing on top of it?
I think it was adaptive reuse. That was what the term they were using of what was already there. It was Austin's Hardware, I believe, and a couple other small shops or storefronts. And I think the quick way to do it was to get everybody on board, the original property owners, everybody at the city planning. We just want to adapt what's here already and kind of go along the same lines, keep this in the downtown area. They didn't want to build too high. It's just 2 stories. I think with the palms across the street, uh, getting it done quickly was certainly something they wanted to do. And
Was Roy still on the city council when this first came up, or
yeah, yeah.
so did
So
he?
he's a,
Was he helpful or not helpful in getting this?
I think the city in general, is if I can recall correctly, I think the city was pretty open to what was going on there. There wasn't a lot of public pushback. I think some people were not sure if the developers were out of town, or in Carpinteria, there's a very close-knit community. So their definition of out of town is sometimes if you're from Santa Barbara or you're from Ventura, that's out of town. So there's a little bit of
Can you
like
smell the weed from there? You can't smell the weed from there.
on harvesting season, you probably can on that second story, but it's really nice, and I think it's one of the nicest places to go and hang out and just that top rooftop bar is going to be nice once that tenant goes in there. So there's a few places that aren't quite open yet. The restaurants are open, but there's some retail shops that are going to take until early summer, June, July.
All right. How about
Jerry,
that?
I don't know if you've
Good
been to
news.
Bettina on Coast Village Road. And if Tina's is anything like Bettina's, you have to go because
Yeah,
that's
it's
the
really good
best
sourdough
pizza.
pizza. Yeah.
All
It's
right.
incredible.
All right. Well, Josh, I recommend everyone read your column this
Pizza
week,
Beat.
your BizHawk column this week, which discovers yet 31 new pizza places and 12 more donut shops, which is astonishing to me the way you're able to just generate that week after week. But
Well,
you had
Jerry, I
an
am committed to
interesting,
my craft. You taught me to be that way.
you had an interesting podcast this week, sort of kind of passing by without much, a lot of notice, but the 100th anniversary of the big earthquake that remade Santa Barbara. To talk a little bit about that. Say a word about that.
Yeah, this is the 100-year anniversary of the earthquake, and I'm be the first person to pat myself on the back of my skills, but I'm also the first person to ready acknowledge my weaknesses, and one of them is, like just learning about Santa Barbara history when it comes to how this quake changed everything. We obviously know that the quake was a big deal, and we hear stories about how we rebuilt, but being able to talk to people, Betsy Green, who wrote a book about this, and then architect Greg Reck, who has been putting on all these events with a whole bunch of other people, to talk about like what happened and what it meant, and to take us back to that time it was fascinating. I mean, everything they were saying, it was just new and interesting and informative. But basically, this quake hit, and it allowed Santa Barbara to rebuild. And so it rebuilt into what we see now, which is this Spanish colonial sort of style of architecture. And there was
Well,
a push,
that was not a thing before the earthquake.
there was a push to go that route, but just like now, there was a huge pushback. And then since you had lost a lot of buildings, then there was a matter of, well, since we're starting from the ground up, let's do this. They had learned a lot from the San Francisco earthquake, which was a few years earlier.
1906.
Yeah. So in terms of
I covered that.
in terms of how to shut off, the power and the fire and the utilities. So there was not some bigger disaster that could have come. Santa Barbara had 20,000 people at the time. And so it's a different sort of scenario. But, they talked about how the city came
So was
together.
it primarily the downtown
Yeah, it
that
was
was destroyed?
primarily downtown. That's where the tallest buildings were, and that's where the rebuilding effort happened. It was also sort of the birth of a little bit of Pearl Chase and that whole movement. And so we talked about the history of the players at that time who helped rebuild Santa Barbara and what it meant. And it's since I was a little kid, I've been told the big one's coming. So they're supposed to come every 100 years. So. I don't know. It's good to be thinking about
Thomas S.
earthquakes.
Stork and the Santa Barbara News Press were influential in that movement as well. Yes.
Yeah. They talked a little bit about that, but it was also funny to read it was called the Santa Barbara Morning News, I guess, at that time. It wasn't called the News Press. And so reading some of the accounts that the
Stork
journalists,
bought that and combined it with his paper, as I recall.
yeah.
History, yeah.
So reading the way the journalists had covered it was, it was sort of felt like Nick Welsh, not to take a jab at it, but it was very thorough, very descriptive, very almost column-like, style of writing. Not quite opinion in it, but you could tell that there was a little bit of voice to it. So it was great. It was on the podcast, Santa Barbara Talks, and it was about 45 minutes. And it wasn't one of the ones where I was doing the talking. I was doing most of the listening.
Yeah, I remember, when we were at the paper and going up to the tower there in the News Press building and looking at some of those papers. I mean, it's really remarkable. And so this,
Well, our friend Sherry Ray is going to be doing a couple of lectures and talks.
yeah,
So, she's very knowledgeable about all of this. She's a
well,
very well-known historian. So, you should have her on the
well,
show to talk about it.
that's why she won't write a story for me about this push for another school downtown. But anyway, I'm not bitter. All right. Ryan P. Cruz, Josh Molina, Nick Welsh, somewhere Callie Fozzie. Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you all for watching, and we will see you next time on Newsmakers.
Thank you.